David Mitchell's hands were shaking at 35,000 feet. The cabin lights were dimmed. Most passengers on flight TG910 from London Heathrow to Bangkok had pulled down their window shades hours ago, cocooning themselves in manufactured darkness somewhere over the Middle East. The hum of the engines was steady, hypnotic, the kind of white noise that usually lulled David into uneasy sleep on the rare occasions he flew. But not tonight. Tonight, he sat rigid in seat 32K, his phone glowing in his lap, the screen casting pale blue light across his weathered face. He'd paid £12 for an hour of in-flight Wi-Fi. Expensive, but he'd wanted to send Pensri a message, to tell her he was almost there, that after 6 months of waiting their life together was finally beginning. Instead, he was staring at words that made his stomach fold in on itself. The messages were in Thai script, flowing and incomprehensible at first glance, but Google Translate had done its work. He read the translation again, hoping he'd misunderstood, hoping the algorithm had made an error. It hadn't. 3 rows ahead, visible when he leaned slightly into the aisle, he could see the back of Pensri's head resting against the window. Her black hair caught the faint light from someone else's screen. She was sleeping, peaceful, beautiful, even from behind. She didn't know he'd opened Facebook, didn't know he'd scrolled through the photos she'd posted 3 days ago, didn't know he'd found the comment thread from 8 months back, the one where someone had written in Thai, another Faring sending money lol. This one sold his house. And Pensri had replied, "Business is business, he's happy. I'm happy. Everyone wins." David's chest felt tight. The air in the cabin suddenly seemed thin, recycled, insufficient. He closed his phone and stared at the seat back in front of him, at the screen embedded there showing a cartoon airplane inching across a digital map. Bangkok was close now. 2 hours. Maybe less. He tried to breathe slowly, tried to think, but all he could feel was the weight of what he'd done. The enormity of the choice he'd made, the house he'd sold, the life he'd dismantled, all of it collapsing into this single moment of clarity at cruising altitude where there was nowhere to run and no way to undo what had already been said in Mott, Ion. 6 months earlier, David's life had looked nothing like this. He lived alone in a 3-bedroom semi-detached house on a quiet street in Croydon, South London, the kind of neighborhood where people kept their hedges trimmed and their curtains closed and minded their own business with the dedication of people who'd lived through enough decades to know better and to get involved. The house had been his and Margaret's for 33 years. They bought it in 1991 for £68,000, a sum that had seemed enormous at the time, a mortgage that had taken nearly 25 years to pay off. Now the house was worth over $400,000 according to the estate agents, though David had never planned to sell. It was filled with Margaret. Her books still lined the shelves in the living room. Her garden tools still hung in the shed. Her handwriting still marked the calendar in the kitchen where she'd noted dental appointments and grocery lists, right up until the week before she died. Cancer, pancreatic, fast, and merciless. 2 years ago now, though some mornings David still woke expecting to hear her moving around downstairs, filling the kettle, humming tunelessly the way she always had. They'd never had children. It wasn't for lack of trying in the early years, but eventually they'd stopped talking about it. Stopped going to doctors, stopped imagining what that other life might have looked like. It had just been the 2 of them. And that had been enough. Until it wasn't the 2 of them anymore. Until it was just David, 60 years old, retired from the Royal Mail after 38 years sorting letters and parcels. A modest pension that brought in about $10,000 from the state and another 6 or 7 from his occupational scheme. Enough to live simply, but not extravagantly. Enough for the bills and the shopping and the occasional pint at the Red Lion down the road. Not enough to feel like life had much flavor left in it. His days had developed a rhythm that felt less like living and more like waiting. He woke at 7 out of habit even though he no longer needed to. Made tea. Ate toast. Watched the morning news with the volume too loud because his hearing wasn't what it used to be. Walked to the Tesco Metro on the high street for milk or bread or something to justify the walk. Came home. Made lunch. Watched more television. Sometimes he'd go to the pub in the evening. His friend Graham used to meet him there, back before Graham retired and moved to Thailand 5 years ago. Now it was just David and a few other regulars, men his age or older, men whose wives had died or left, men who nursed their beers slowly and talked about football or the weather or how everything used to be better before all the changes nobody asked for. His sister Carol called once a week from Spain, where she'd moved with her husband after he'd sold his plumbing business. She worried about him. He could hear it in her voice, the way she asked too brightly about what he'd been doing, whether he'd been eating properly, whether he'd thought about joining a club or taking a class or maybe coming to visit her in Marbella for a few weeks. He always said he was fine. He always said he'd think about visiting. He never did. The truth was he felt invisible. Not in a dramatic way. Nobody was cruel to him. But he moved through the world and left no impression. The cashier at Tesco didn't recognize him, even though he went there almost every day. His neighbors nodded politely but didn't stop to chat. His old colleagues from the Royal Mail had their own lives, their own retirements, their own routines that didn't include him. Margaret had been the social one, the one who organized things, who remembered birthdays, who kept them connected to the world. Without her, David had simply faded. He wasn't depressed exactly. He didn't cry or feel hopeless. He just felt like he was slowly disappearing, like each day erased him a little more. And eventually, there'd be nothing left but an empty house and a pension payment going into an account nobody checked. Then Graham came back to visit. It was November, cold and damp. The kind of English autumn that seeped into your bones and made you remember why people retired to warmer places. Graham looked tanned and healthy, 10 years younger than when he'd left. He'd lost weight. He smiled more. He talked about his life in Pattaya with an enthusiasm David hadn't heard from him in decades. The cost of living, the weather, the ease of everything, and the women. Graham had married a Thai woman named Noida. She was 20 years younger than him. They'd met through a dating site. She made him happy, he said. She took care of him. She didn't nag or complain or bring up everything he'd done wrong for the past 30 years like his ex-wife had. She was just grateful to have a good man, Graham said. A decent man, someone who treated her well. They sat in the Red Lion over pints of bitter, and Graham showed David photos on his phone. Noy smiling in their apartment, not Noy at the beach, Noy cooking. Graham and Noy at a temple. You should try it, mate, Graham said, his words slightly slurred. Plenty of good women out there, real women. Not like these British birds who just want to take half your pension in a divorce. David had laughed it off at first. It felt strange, almost shameful, the idea of shopping for a wife online like she was something you could order from Amazon. But Graham kept on about it, kept talking about how lonely David looked, how he deserved better than sitting in this pub every night waiting to die. You've got that house, mate, worth a fortune now, innit? Sell it. Move somewhere warm. Find a woman who actually appreciates you. Live a little before it's too late. David said he'd think about it. He didn't mean it. But after Graham left, after the house was silent again and the days resumed their gray procession, the idea kept circling back. What if Graham was right? What if there was still time for something different? What if he didn't have to fade away alone in Croydon? 3 months after Margaret's death anniversary, on a Friday evening after too much wine and too much silence, David opened his laptop and searched for international dating sites. He felt ridiculous doing it. Felt like a pathetic old man. A cliché, the kind of person he'd have pitied if he'd read about them in the Daily Mail. But he created a profile anyway on a site called Hearts Across Borders that specialized in connecting Western men with Asian women. He used a recent photo one Carol had taken when she'd visited for Margaret's funeral. He wrote a simple bio. Retired postal worker, widowed looking for companionship and maybe more. Honest, loyal, traditional values. He didn't expect anything. He almost closed the browser. But then the messages started coming. Within an hour, he had 5. By the next morning, 12. Most were brief, clearly copy-pasted, generic greetings from women whose profiles looked too polished, too perfect. But one stood out. Her name was Pensri. She was 42 years old from Udon Thani in northeastern Thailand. Her profile photos showed a woman with a warm smile, dressed modestly, standing with an elderly woman she identified as her mother. No bikini shots, no nightclub photos, just simple pictures of everyday life. Her first message was in broken English but felt genuine. Hello, David. I see your profile and think you have kind face. I am simple woman. I work as seamstress. I never marry. I take care of my mother. I hope find good man to share life. Maybe we can talk. I am not good English, but I try. David stared at the message for a long time. Then he replied. They began chatting on the site's messaging system at first, then moved to Line, a messaging app Pensri said was more common in Thailand. The conversations were slow at first, stilted by the language barrier and the awkwardness of strangers trying to find common ground across continents. But Pensri was patient. She asked about his day. She sent photos of her life, her small wooden house, the rice fields near her village, her mother sitting outside peeling vegetables. She told him about her work, sewing clothes for a local shop, earning about 8,000 baht a month, roughly 180 pounds, barely enough to survive. She talked about her dreams, a better house, medical care for her mother who had diabetes, maybe a small business of her own someday. But mostly, she just listened. She asked David about Margaret, about his life, about what made him happy, and slowly, Without fully realizing it was happening, David began to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Wanted. The messages came every morning. Pensri would wake up in Thailand, 7 hours ahead of London, and send him a cheerful greeting. "Good morning, my David. I hope you sleep good. I think about you." She'd send voice messages online, her accent thick but her laughter bright and genuine. She'd ask what he had for breakfast. She'd tell him about the weather in Udon Thani, about her mother's health, about the dress she was sewing. The messages were simple, ordinary, but they filled the silence in David's house. He started waking up earlier just to reply to her before she went to work. He found himself smiling at his phone. He told her things he hadn't told anyone, about how lonely he'd been, about how invisible he felt, about how much he missed being needed. Pensri understood, she said. She was lonely too. She'd been unlucky in love. The men her age wanted younger women. She was past the age most men considered marriageable in Thailand, but she still believed in love, still believed the right person was out there. Maybe David was that person, she suggested gently. Maybe Buddha had brought them together for a reason. David had never been religious, but he liked the idea, liked the thought that Margaret's death and his loneliness and this random decision to create a profile on a dating site had all been part of some larger plan, some cosmic arrangement that was leading him towards something better. By the second month, they were video calling. Pensri's face on the screen was exactly as her photos had promised. She wore simple clothes, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She was beautiful in an unassuming way, the kind of beauty that came from openness and warmth rather than careful presentation. She asked if she could call him darling. He said yes. She started ending her messages with, "I love you." He hesitated at first, but eventually he said it back, and he meant it, or at least he thought he did. He was falling in love with the way she made him feel, with the idea of being someone's David again instead of just David, alone in a house that smelled like dust and regret. In the third month, Pensri's mother fell ill. Pensri mentioned it casually at first, said her mother had fainted, that the local clinic said her blood sugar was dangerously high. They needed to take her to the hospital in Udon Thani for tests, but hospitals in Thailand weren't free like the NHS. They required payment up front. Pensri didn't ask David for money. She just mentioned the cost, 35,000 baht, roughly 800 pounds, and said she was trying to figure out how to borrow it from relatives. David offered immediately. Pensri refused. She couldn't accept such generosity, she said. It was too much. But David insisted. What good was money if you couldn't help the people you cared about? He sent the funds through Western Union. Pensri cried on video when she received it. She called him her hero, her angel. She promised she'd pay him back somehow, someday. David told her not to be silly. 2 weeks later, her motorbike broke down. She needed it to get to work, to take her mother to medical appointments. The repair cost 12,000 baht, about 270 pounds. Again, Pensri didn't ask. Again, David offered. She resisted less this time. Then her landlord threatened to evict her for being 2 months behind on rent. Another 25,000 baht. David sent it. Each time, Pensri's gratitude was overwhelming. Each time, David felt more certain that he was doing the right thing. His friends at the pub, the few who knew, started expressing concern. His sister Carol called and asked pointed questions about this woman he'd never met. But David felt defensive. They didn't understand. Pensri wasn't like other women. She wasn't manipulative or greedy. She was just struggling, just trying to survive in a country where opportunities were scarce and poverty was real. He was helping someone he loved. What was wrong with that? In the 4th month, Pensri suggested he visit Thailand. Better yet, she said, why didn't he think about moving there? His pension would go so much further. He could live like a king on what he received each month. They could be together. They could build a life. She painted a picture that sounded like a dream. Warm weather year-round, low cost of living, a beautiful house they could build together, a community that would welcome him, a woman who loved him and would take care of him in his later years. No more cold English winters, no more loneliness, no more fading away in an empty house. David began researching. He learned that thousands of British expats retired in Thailand. The cost of living was indeed much lower. A comfortable life could be had for around 1,000 to 1,500 pounds a month. His combined pensions would easily cover that. He could live better than he did in Croydon. But he'd need capital to set up, to buy land, to build a house. The only asset he had was the house in Croydon, the house where he and Margaret had spent 33 years, the house filled with her memory. Pensri said she understood it was a big decision. She didn't pressure him. She just mentioned occasionally how wonderful it would be to wake up next to him every day, to grow old together, to finally have the life they both deserved. And slowly, the idea stopped seeming crazy and started seeming like the only logical choice. What was he holding on to the house for? Margaret was gone. He had no children to leave it to. His sister had her own life in Spain. The house was just a building, and he was just an old man rattling around inside it, waiting for nothing. In Thailand, he could matter again. He could be loved again. He could start over. And so, with a mixture of fear and hope and the desperate need to believe that his life wasn't finished yet, David Mitchell called an estate agent and put his house on the market. The estate agent's sign went up on a Tuesday morning in March. David stood at his bedroom window watching two men in company fleeces hammer the post into the small patch of lawn at the front of the house. For sale. The words felt enormous, final, like a declaration he couldn't take back even though the contract he'd signed gave him every legal right to withdraw. His sister Carol called that afternoon. Someone from the neighborhood had seen the sign and messaged her. Her voice came through the phone sharp with worry and something close to anger. "David, what the hell are you doing?" He tried to explain, tried to make her understand about Pensri, about the life waiting for him in Thailand, about how the house was too big and too full of ghosts, and how his pension would stretch so much further somewhere warm. Carol listened in silence and then said very quietly, "You've never even met this woman in person." David felt his jaw tighten. That was the response everyone had. His friend at the pub had said the same thing. The estate agent had raised an eyebrow when David mentioned he was planning to move abroad. Even the woman at the post office had given him a concerned look when he'd sent another Western Union transfer. But none of them understood. None of them had spent 2 years sitting alone in a house that felt like a mausoleum. None of them woke up every morning to silence so thick it felt like drowning. Pensri was real. Their connection was real. The fact that they hadn't met in person yet didn't change that. People fell in love online all the time. Now the world had changed. Carol was just stuck in the past, suspicious of anything that didn't fit her narrow idea of how life should work. He told her he'd made up his mind. She told him he was being a fool. They didn't speak for 3 weeks after that. The house sold faster than David expected. The market in Croydon was strong. Families were desperate for anything in a decent postcode with good schools nearby. Within 2 weeks, he had 3 offers. He accepted one for £418,000. After estate agent fees and legal costs, he'd walk away with roughly $415,000. It was more money than he'd ever imagined having at once, more than he'd earned in a decade of working. The completion date was set for early June. That gave him 3 months to prepare. 3 months to sort through 33 years of accumulated life and decide what to keep and what to let go. He started with Margaret's things. Her clothes went to a charity shop. Her books he boxed up and gave to the local library. Her jewelry, what little there was, he kept in a small wooden box thinking perhaps he'd give it to Carol eventually as a peace offering. The furniture he sold on Facebook Marketplace or gave away to anyone who'd collected. He kept almost nothing, a suitcase of clothes, some photographs, important documents. Everything else was just weight, just anchors tying him to a life that no longer existed. Pensri sent encouraging messages throughout the process. She was so proud of him, she said, so excited for their future. She sent him photos of land plots near Udon Thani, beautiful green expanses with palm trees and distant mountains. She'd been looking, she said, with a local estate agent. There was one plot in particular she loved. 5 rai, about 2 acres, in a quiet village 20 minutes from the city. The price was 1.2 million baht, roughly £27,000. It was perfect, she said. Enough space for a nice house, a garden, maybe some fruit trees. Room to breathe. Room to be happy. David looked at the photos on his phone and felt something lift in his chest. It looked like paradise. He asked Pensri about the legalities. He'd been reading online, on expat forums about foreign property ownership in Thailand. The rules were complicated. Foreigners couldn't own land directly, but there were ways around it. Some foreigners set up Thai companies to hold the land. Others had the land registered in their Thai wife's name with legal agreements protecting their investment. Pensri explained it simply. Under Thai law, she said, the land would need to be in her name. But once they were married, it would be jointly owned in practice. And the house they built on the land, that could be registered in David's name. Her cousin was a lawyer. He could draw up all the proper paperwork to make sure everything was protected. David hesitated. It felt risky putting everything in her name when they weren't even married yet. Pensri seemed hurt when he raised the concern. Did he not trust her? After everything they'd shared, after all the months of talking and planning and falling in love, did he really think she was the kind of person who would cheat him? David backtracked quickly. Of course he trusted her. He was just trying to understand how things worked. Bentry softened. She understood, she said. It was a lot of money, a big step, but they were building a life together. Marriage was about trust. And speaking of marriage, maybe they should make it official before he moved over. It would make the visa process simpler. He could get a 1-year marriage visa based on being married to a Thai national. Renewable every year, as long as they stayed married. Much easier than a retirement visa, which required keeping a large sum in a Thai bank account and dealing with complicated paperwork. They could have a small ceremony, nothing fancy, just the legal part handled through her cousin the lawyer and registered with the British Embassy. Then, when David arrived, they could have a proper celebration with her family and friends. David agreed to everything. It felt like the current was carrying him now, and all he had to do was let it. They arranged the marriage paperwork remotely. Pentry's cousin handled the Thai side. David went to a solicitor in Croydon who specialized in international documents and had his paperwork notarized and sent over. There were forms and fees and official stamps. It felt bureaucratic and unromantic, but Pentry assured him it was all necessary. The important thing was that they'd be legally married, protected, committed. In late May, a week before the house completion, they had a ceremony over video call. Pentry wore a traditional Thai silk dress. She'd set up her phone in what looked like a small office. Her cousin, the lawyer, was there, a middle-aged man in a dress shirt who nodded seriously at the camera. There was a translator, a young woman who repeated their vows in English and Thai. David sat at his kitchen table in Croydon wearing the suit he'd worn to Margaret's funeral because it was the only one he owned. He repeated the words the translator told him to say. He watched Pentry smile on the screen, her eyes bright. When it was done, her cousin held up an official-looking document with red stamps and signatures. Pentry blew David a kiss. "Now you are my husband," she said. David felt a strange mixture of joy and unreality. He'd just gotten married to a woman 7,000 miles away through a phone screen. It should have felt wrong. But Pentry's happiness seemed so genuine that he pushed the doubts away. This was modern love. This was how things worked now. The house in Croydon completed on June 7th. David spent his last night there on an air mattress in the empty living room. The walls were marked with rectangles of darker paint where pictures had hung for decades. The carpets showed indentations from furniture that was gone. Every sound echoed. He didn't sleep much. In the morning, he handed the keys to the estate agent, signed the final papers, and watched the money appear in his bank account, £415,000. He stared at the number on his phone screen. It didn't feel real. He'd opened a Thai bank account remotely with Pentry's help, using a service for expats. She'd guided him through the process, told him which documents to submit, which boxes to tick. It had seemed complicated, but she'd made it manageable. Now he needed to transfer the initial funds for the land purchase and construction deposit. Pentry had sent him the details. Her cousin, the lawyer, had set up an escrow account, she said, to hold the funds safely until the land transfer was complete. David logged into his banking app and initiated a transfer of £50,000. The bank's fraud prevention system flagged it immediately. He received a phone call from their security team. They asked if he was being coerced, if he knew the recipient, if he understood this was a very large sum to send overseas. David felt irritated by the questions. He was 60 years old, not senile. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was buying land with his wife. It was legal and proper and none of their business. The bank representative sounded skeptical but eventually processed the transfer. The money left his account. Pentry confirmed receipt 2 days later. She was overjoyed. She sent him photos of the land with a sold sign planted at the front. She sent him photos of herself standing on the property, arms spread wide, smiling. "Our land," she wrote. "Our future." Construction began almost immediately. Pentry sent regular updates, photos of foundation work, concrete being poured, walls going up. She was overseeing everything, she said, working with a local builder she'd known for years, trustworthy, affordable. The design was simple but beautiful. 2 bedrooms, an open-plan living area, a covered terrace, Thai style but with Western comforts, air conditioning, a proper Western toilet, a kitchen with a real oven, not just a gas burner like most Thai homes had. She sent him diagrams and measurements, asked his opinion on tiles and paint colors. David felt involved, consulted, important. He was building something, creating something. For the first time in years, he had a project, a purpose. He transferred another £15,000 for materials and labor costs. Then another 10,000 when Pensry said they'd hit unexpected issues with the foundation, rocky soil that needed extra work. David didn't question it. Construction always went over budget. He'd heard enough horror stories from friends who'd done extensions or renovations. At least Pensry was keeping him informed, being transparent about the costs. By August, the house was taking real shape. Pensry sent a video tour shot on her phone, walking through the bare concrete rooms, pointing out where everything would go. "This is our bedroom," she said, her voice echoing. "This is where we will wake up together every morning." David watched the video a dozen times. He was living temporarily in a furnished rental in Nottingham, closer to a cousin who'd offered to let him stay for a few months while he sorted things out. The rental was small and depressing, a generic flat that smelled like other people's cooking. But it was temporary. By October, he'd be in Thailand, in his own house, with his wife. Starting over, his visa application was straightforward. Once he had the marriage certificate, he applied for a non-immigrant O visa based on marriage to a Thai national. It required proof of the marriage, proof of funds, a police clearance certificate, medical documents. Pensry helped him navigate the requirements, told him what to say at the interview at the Thai embassy in London. The visa was approved. 1 year, renewable. He booked his flight for early October, one-way by British Airways to Bangkok. He'd be landing at Suvarnabhumi Airport at 6 in the morning local time. Pensry would meet him there. She was so excited, she said. She'd been counting down the days. She sent him photos of the house nearing completion. The walls were painted now, cream with blue trim. The roof was tiled. The windows were installed. It looked modest but solid, real. She sent photos of the bedroom with a new bed frame. "I want everything perfect for you," she wrote. David's remaining funds sat in his UK bank account, £340,000. He'd transfer more once he arrived and could open a proper Thai bank account in person, see the lawyers face to face, make sure everything was documented correctly. Pensry agreed that was wise. "No rush," she said. They had all the time in the world. His sister Carol called him one last time before the flight. She'd softened slightly over the months, resigned to his decision even if she didn't support it. "Just be careful," she said. "Please, David, just be careful." He promised her he would. He told her he loved her. He told her everything would be fine. He believed it. The days before the flight passed in a blur of final preparations. He closed his rental agreement. He packed his single suitcase. He organized his pension payments to continue depositing into his UK account, planning to transfer what he needed to Thailand monthly. He said goodbye to his cousin. He took one last walk through Nottingham city centre, a place he'd never particularly liked, but which represented the last piece of England he'd see for a long time, maybe forever. He felt nervous, but determined. Everyone had doubted him. Everyone had questioned his choices. But he was doing something brave, something most people his age were too afraid to do. He was choosing life over slow death, love over loneliness, possibility over regret. The night before the flight, he couldn't sleep. He lay in the rental flat's uncomfortable bed, scrolling through his message history with Pensry. Months and months of conversations, thousands of messages. "I miss you. I love you. I can't wait to hold you. Soon, my darling, soon we will be together." He looked at her photos, her smile, her warm eyes. He tried to imagine what it would feel like to finally touch her, to kiss her, to fall asleep next to her in the house they built together. He tried to silence the small voice in the back of his mind that whispered warnings he didn't want to hear. In the morning, he took a taxi to Heathrow, checked his bag, went through security, sat at the gate watching planes take off and land. His phone buzzed. A message from Pensry. "Have a safe flight, my husband. I will be waiting for you. Our life starts tomorrow." David smiled. He boarded the plane, found his seat 32K. Window. He paid a bit extra for the seat selection, wanting to watch England disappear beneath him. The plane filled up. He noticed a woman boarding late, moving down the aisle with a small carry-on bag. She looked vaguely familiar. As she passed his row, he realized with a jolt that it was Pensry. She was on the same flight. She glanced at him, smiled politely the way strangers do in tight airplane spaces, and continued walking. She took a seat 3 rows ahead. David sat frozen. His mind tried to process what had just happened. Pensry was on the plane. She hadn't told him. Why hadn't she told him? He thought about calling out to her, but the moment passed. The cabin crew were doing safety demonstrations. People were settling in. He told himself there must be an explanation. Maybe she wanted to surprise him. Maybe she'd been visiting family in London and hadn't mentioned it. Maybe this was some kind of romantic gesture. But unease crept through him like cold water. The plane took off. England tilted away beneath them. The seatbelt sign went off. David sat rigid, staring at the back of Pensree's head 3 rows forward. She didn't turn around, didn't look for him. Hours passed. Dinner service came and went. The cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers settled into sleep. David couldn't. His mind was racing. He pulled out his phone, switched it to airplane mode, and opened their message history. He scrolled back through months of conversations, looking for any mention of her planning to be in England. Nothing. He opened Facebook, something he rarely did. Pensree's profile was semi-private, but he was her friend, so he could see more than a stranger would. He started scrolling through her photos. Recent posts. Photos from a week ago. Pensree at a beach resort, Phuket, according to the location tag. She was with a group of women, all dressed expensively, holding cocktails. She'd never mentioned a trip to Phuket. He scrolled further. More photos, restaurants, hotels. Pensree with a young man, maybe mid-20s, shirtless, his arm around her waist. The caption in Thai. He copied it. Opened Google Translate. Living my best life with my real friends. David's hands started shaking. He scrolled back further. Photos from throughout the year. Different men. Different places. A lifestyle that didn't match the simple seamstress from Udon Thani she'd described. He found a post from 8 months ago. A comment thread. The Thai text looked casual, joking. He translated it piece by piece. The first comment. Another Farang sending money low. This one sold his house. A reply. How many now? 5. And Pensree's response. Business is business. He's happy. I'm happy. Everyone wins. David felt the cabin tilt. His vision blurred at the edges. He kept scrolling. Found more comments. More references to customers. To Farang wallets. To men who sent money thinking they were buying love. He opened his banking app with trembling fingers. The £50,000 he'd transferred. He pulled up the land documents Pensree's cousin had sent him, scanned PDFs he'd never had independently verified. He zoomed in on the names. The land registry showed a single owner. Pensree Somchai, no joint ownership, no foreigner listed. The house being built, same thing. Registered solely in her name. He searched frantically on his phone for Thai property law. Forum posts from expats, legal warnings. The facts were clear and brutal. Foreigners couldn't own land in Thailand. Any land purchase was owned entirely by the Thai national whose name was on the deed. The house built on that land was also typically owned by the landowner, unless specifically structured otherwise with proper legal agreements. Agreements David had never actually seen. The marriage certificate, he suddenly remembered, had seemed too easy, too quick. He searched for UK government guidance on marriages abroad. Marriages in Thailand required an affirmation of freedom to marry from the British Embassy, a document he'd needed to obtain in person or through specific legal processes. He'd done none of that. What Pensree's cousin had arranged, the video ceremony, the paperwork with red stamps, it might not be legally recognized in the UK at all. It might be worthless. David looked up. 3 rows ahead, Pensree was sleeping peacefully, her head against the window. The small airline blanket pulled up to her shoulders. She looked innocent, peaceful, beautiful, and David realized with horror that he didn't know her at all. Everything she'd told him, everything they'd shared, the woman he'd fallen in love with might not exist, might never have existed. He had sold his house, sent £50,000, abandoned his country and his family, for a lie, for a fantasy, for a business transaction dressed up as love, and he was trapped at 35,000 feet with nowhere to go and no way to undo what he'd already done. The plane descended through thick morning clouds. David hadn't slept. He'd spent the remaining hours of the flight staring at his phone, scrolling through evidence of his own stupidity. More photos, more comments he'd never seen because he'd never looked, never questioned, never doubted. He'd been so desperate to believe that someone could love him, that he'd ignored every warning sign, every inconsistency, every moment that should have made him pause. The cabin crew moved through the aisles collecting cups and blankets. The captain announced their approach to Bangkok. Outside the window, Thailand appeared beneath the clouds. Green and sprawling and utterly foreign. David felt sick. The seatbelt sign illuminated. People around him stirred, stretched, pulled out phones to turn off airplane mode. 3 rows ahead, Pensree woke. She sat up, ran her hands through her hair, checked her own phone. She didn't look back, didn't search the cabin for him. David's heart hammered against his ribs. He could confront her now, walk up to her seat, demand answers. But his body wouldn't move. Fear held him paralyzed. Fear and humiliation, and the terrible knowledge that confronting her would make it all real, would force him to admit out loud that he'd been conned, that he was exactly the pathetic old fool everyone had warned him not to be. The plane touched down with a jolt. Suvarnabhumi Airport. 6:15 in the morning local time. The cabin erupted in the sounds of seatbelts unclicking, overhead bins opening, people eager to disembark after 13 hours in the air. David sat frozen as passengers shuffled past him. Pensri stood, pulled down a small carry-on bag from the overhead compartment 3 rows up, and joined the queue moving toward the exit. She was wearing jeans and a nice blouse. She looked fresh somehow, despite the long flight. She still hadn't looked back at him. David finally forced himself to stand. His legs felt weak. He pulled down his own bag and joined the slow procession off the plane. The jet bridge smelled like humidity and jet fuel. Inside the terminal, the air conditioning hit him like a wall. Signs in Thai script and English pointed toward immigration. The crowd dispersed as passengers headed toward different queues. Thai nationals to the left, foreign passports to the right. David watched Pensri walk toward the Thai nationals line. She moved with purpose, familiar with the process. She joined a shorter queue and within minutes was at the counter, handing over her passport. David shuffled toward the foreigners' line, which was much longer. Families with tired children, business travelers in rumpled suits, backpackers with enormous packs. He waited, inched forward, watched Pensri clear immigration and disappear toward baggage claim. His turn came finally. The immigration officer was a young man in a crisp uniform. He took David's passport, scanned it, looked at the screen, looked at David. "Purpose of visit?" he asked in accented English. I'm here to live with my wife. I have a marriage visa." The officer's expression didn't change. He examined the visa page. "This is tourist visa, 30 days. David's stomach dropped. "No, I applied for a non-immigrant O visa, marriage visa, 1 year. The officer showed him the page. There it was. A 30-day tourist visa stamp, not the year-long visa he'd been approved for. He must go to immigration office in Bangkok, apply for extension. This is tourist only. David wanted to argue, but the queue behind him was long and the officer was already waving him through. He took his passport with shaking hands and moved into the baggage claim area. His mind was reeling. The visa was wrong. How was it wrong? Had the embassy made a mistake, or had something else happened? Something he didn't understand yet, but that fit the pattern of everything else unraveling. He found his suitcase on the carousel. One bag containing everything he owned now. He wheeled it toward customs, through the nothing to declare lane, and out into the arrivals hall. The space was enormous and crowded. Taxi drivers held signs with names. Families embraced returning relatives. Tour guides shepherded groups of confused tourists. And there, near the exit, stood Pensri. She was looking at her phone. When she saw David, her face lit up with that smile he knew so well from video calls. She rushed toward him. "David, you're here. Finally." She threw her arms around him. She smelled like perfume and airplane air. Her body against his felt real and solid, and nothing like he'd imagined. David stood stiff in her embrace. Pensri pulled back, still smiling, though something flickered in her eyes. Confusion, maybe. Or caution. "Are you okay? You look tired. Long flight, yes?" David's mouth was dry. "You were on the plane." Pensri blinked. "What?" "You were on the same flight. I saw you. You were 3 rows ahead of me." Her smile faltered for just a second, then recovered. "Oh, yes. I was visiting my cousin in London. I told you, remember? I wanted to surprise you. Meet you at the airport like proper wife." She hadn't told him. There was no mention in any of their messages. David knew because he'd checked during the flight, scrolled back through months of conversations. But his voice wouldn't work. The words stuck in his throat. Pensri linked her arm through his. "Come, let's go. I have taxi waiting. You must be so tired. We go to hotel first, okay? Rest. Then tomorrow, we go see the house. It's almost finished. So beautiful. You will love it." They walked out into the Bangkok morning. The heat hit David like a physical thing, thick and wet and overwhelming. The sun was barely up, but the temperature felt like high summer in England. Sweat immediately prickled across his skin. Pensri led him to a taxi rank, spoke rapid Thai to a driver, and they loaded David's suitcase into the trunk. The drive into Bangkok was disorienting. Massive highways, dense traffic even at this hour, buildings and billboards covered in Thai script, street vendors setting up stalls. The city felt chaotic and alive, and completely incomprehensible. Pensri chatted happily, pointing out landmarks, talking about the hotel she'd booked for them. "A nice place in Sukhumvit," she said. "Popular area. Lots of foreigners. David should rest today, she said. Get over the jet lag. They had time. All the time in the world. David stared out the window and said nothing. The hotel was a mid-range business hotel, the kind of anonymous international chain that could have been anywhere. Pentry handled check-in, speaking Thai to the receptionist. They took the elevator to the 7th floor. The room was clean and impersonal. 2 single beds pushed together. A view of other buildings. Air conditioning that hummed loudly. Pentry sat on the bed and patted the space beside her. Come, sit, talk to me. You are so quiet. David remained standing. His suitcase sat by the door. He felt like he was watching himself from outside his body. I need to ask you something. Pentry's smile dimmed slightly. Okay, the land, the house. Is it in both our names? Pentry's expression shifted. The warmth drained from it, replaced by something harder. David, we talked about this already. You know Thai law. Foreigner cannot own land. It is in my name for legal reason. But we are married. It is our land, our house. I want to see the documents, the actual land deed, the marriage certificate verified by the British Embassy. Pentry stood. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. Why you are acting like this? You don't trust me? After everything? David's hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone, opened Facebook, turned the screen toward her. Who are these people? These men in your photos? These comments about Farang and money and customers? Pentry glanced at the screen. Her face went still. Then she looked back at David. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Pentry sat back down on the bed. When she spoke, her voice was different. The sweetness was gone. It was businesslike, matter of fact. Those are old photos, friends. You take everything out of context. The comments are from last month. Thai people joke different than British people. You don't understand the culture. One comment says, how many now? 5. What does that mean? Pentry's jaw tightened. It means nothing. Is the land actually in both our names or just yours? I told you. It is in my name because I'm a foreigner. I know. But is there any legal document that protects my investment? Any contract that says if we separate, I get my money back? Pentry stood again. She walked to the window, looked out at Bangkok, arms crossed. You want to talk about contracts on our first day together? This is how you want to start our marriage? I sent you 50,000 pounds. David's voice cracked. I sold my house. I left my country. I just want to know if any of it is real. Pentry turned to face him. Her eyes were cold now. All pretense gone. The land is real. The house is real. I never lied about that. You can go see it yourself. But it's yours, not ours, just yours. Yes, it is mine. Because this is Thailand, not England. Because you are a foreigner, and this is how things work here. You knew this. I explained this. Did you lie about anything else? Pentry laughed. It was a harsh sound. You think you are the only lonely old man in the world? You think you are special? You came to Thailand looking for a wife like you were shopping on Amazon. You wanted a young woman to take care of you, to make you feel like big man again. So I gave you what you wanted. You were happy. What is the problem? David felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. The problem is, you made me believe you loved me. I like you fine. You were nice enough. Not cruel like some men. I would have stayed with you, made it work. But you come here suspicious, accusing me, treating me like criminal. So now, I don't know. What about the marriage? Is it even legal? Pentry shrugged. Legal in Thailand, maybe not in UK. Does it matter? You have tourist visa anyway, not marriage visa. I can see stamp in your passport when you show immigration officer. How did you know about my visa? I have eyes. They stared at each other. David felt everything collapsing. All the hope, all the dreams. The house in Croydon was sold. His money was transferred. His old life was gone. And standing in front of him was a stranger wearing Pentry's face. What happens now? He asked quietly. Pentry's expression softened slightly. Not warmth exactly, but something like pragmatism. That is up to you. The house is half built. You already invest 50,000 pounds. You walk away now, you lose everything. You stay, you transfer the rest of the money like we planned. We finish the house. You can live there. I will stay with you for a while. Make it look good. Be your wife in public. Maybe in time it becomes real. Maybe not. But at least you have a house. A place to live. Better than nothing, yes? Better than nothing, David repeated. The words felt like ashes in his mouth. What if I want my money back? What if I want to go home? Home where? You sold your house, and the money is already spent. Land purchase, construction. You think I keep it in a bank account? It is in the ground, David, in bricks and concrete. You want it back, you sell the house, but the house is in my name, so good luck with that. David sank onto the edge of the bed. His vision blurred. He was going to be sick. Pensry watched him for a moment, then her voice softened slightly. Listen, I am not bad person. You are not first Farang I meet. You are not first man who wants easy answer to loneliness. This is business. I tell you that from the beginning, in my own way. You chose not to hear it. You chose to believe fairy tale. That is not my fault. You lied to me. I gave you hope. Is that so terrible? You were dying in that English house, alone and sad. I gave you reason to wake up, reason to dream. That is worth something, no? David couldn't speak, couldn't process. Pensry picked up her purse. I'm going out for a while. Give you time to think. You want to stay. We continue like we planned. You want to go, then go. But understand you leave with nothing. Your choice. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. For what it is worth, I think you are nicer than most. I would not mind being married to you for real, but you have to accept reality first. This is Thailand. This is how things work. You adapt or you suffer. She left. The door clicked shut behind her. David sat in the silent hotel room. The air conditioning hummed. Outside, Bangkok roared with traffic and life. He pulled out his phone, stared at his sister's number. He couldn't call her, couldn't admit what had happened. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He opened his banking app. 340,000 pounds remained. His entire life savings. Everything he had left in the world. Over the following days, David moved through Bangkok in a fog. He contacted the British Embassy, explained his situation to a sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful consular officer. They took notes, asked questions, but the conclusion was clear. He'd entered into financial agreements as a private citizen. He'd willingly transferred money, unless he could prove criminal fraud, which required evidence of deliberate deception with intent to steal. There was little they could do. The land documents were legal. The money was spent legitimately on land and construction. The fact that the property was in Pensry's name wasn't illegal. It was how Thai law worked. Foolish perhaps for David to have trusted her, but not criminal on her part. He contacted a Thai lawyer independently, found one through an expat forum. The lawyer was a middle-aged Thai man with excellent English and a weary expression that suggested he'd seen this situation many times before. He reviewed the documents David had, the land deed, the construction contracts, the marriage certificate. His assessment was blunt. The land and house were legally Pensry's property. David had no ownership claim. The marriage certificate was valid in Thailand, but the process hadn't followed UK requirements, so it likely wouldn't be recognized by British authorities. David could pursue a civil case claiming he'd been defrauded, but it would cost tens of thousands of pounds in legal fees, take years to work through Thai courts, and likely fail, because proving fraud required showing Pensry had never intended to fulfill her promises. But she had bought land and built a house. She could argue she'd fulfilled her obligations, and the relationship simply didn't work out. Thai courts generally sided with Thai nationals in property disputes with foreigners. The lawyer's advice was simple: cut your losses. Stop any further transfers. Return to the UK, move on. But David had no home in the UK to return to. He spent a week in the hotel, paralyzed by indecision. Pensry came and went. She was civil but distant. She took phone calls in Thai that David couldn't understand. She went out for hours and offered no explanation when she returned. Sometimes she slept in the hotel room, in the second bed. Sometimes she didn't come back at all. David tried to eat but had no appetite. The Thai food was too spicy, too unfamiliar. He lost weight, stopped shaving, stopped caring. He scrolled through expat forums reading stories like his own. Men who'd been scammed, men who'd lost everything. The comment sections were brutal, half sympathetic, half cruel. Another idiot who thought he could buy love. Stupid old men deserve what they get. Why do Farang never learn? David didn't disagree with him. He finally called his sister. She was in Marbella. It was evening there. Her voice came through the phone tight with worry. David, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for days. He told her everything. The whole story spilled out of him in a rush. The dating site, the messages, the money, the house, the flight, the realization, the trap. Carol listened without interrupting. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then she said very quietly, "Come stay with me. Just get on a plane and come here. We'll figure out the rest later. I can't afford to lose the 50,000, Carol. It's all I have. It's already lost, David. You know that. He did know that, but admitting it felt like admitting his life was over, that he'd thrown away everything for a fantasy that was never real. Carol's voice softened. Please, just come. We'll get you sorted. You still have money left. You can rent a flat. Start over. It won't be the same as before, but it will be something. Better than staying there with someone who doesn't love you. 3 days later, David boarded a flight to Malaga. He left Thailand having never seen the house he'd paid for. Never visited Udon Thani. Never met Pensri's mother, who may or may not have actually existed. Pensri met him at the hotel to say goodbye. She seemed almost sad. She told him he was making a mistake, that he should stay, that they could make it work. But her heart wasn't in it, and neither was his. She didn't ask for more money, didn't beg him to stay, just hugged him briefly and said, "Good luck, David. I hope you find what you were looking for." He wanted to hate her but couldn't quite manage it. She was right in a way. He had been looking for something she couldn't give him because it didn't exist. He couldn't buy companionship, couldn't purchase love, couldn't solve loneliness by transferring money to a stranger on the other side of the world. He'd known that on some level. He'd just chosen not to believe it. Carol met him at Malaga Airport. She looked older than he remembered, worry lines deep around her eyes. She hugged him tight and didn't ask questions. She drove him to her apartment in Marbella, set him up in the spare room, made him tea, let him sleep for 16 hours straight. Over the following weeks, they worked together to salvage what remained of his life. David transferred the £340,000 to a new account, opened a Spanish bank account, started looking at rental properties, found a small one-bedroom flat in Marbella he could afford on his pension. It wasn't much, but it was something, a place to exist. Carol introduced him to her friends, other British expats, people who'd retired to Spain for the weather and the lifestyle. They were kind, included him in dinners and outings, tried to make him feel welcome. David went through the motions, but inside he felt hollowed out, used up. He gambled everything on a dream and lost. 3 months later, David returned to England, not to London, which held too many memories, but to Nottingham, where his cousin had offered him a more permanent arrangement. A room in his house, affordable rent, a chance to rebuild slowly. David found the small flat he'd eventually rent, moved in with his single suitcase, the same one he'd taken to Thailand. Started the long process of creating a new routine, new walks, new shops, new pubs. His pension payments continued depositing into his account. Enough to live on if he was careful. The £325,000 sat in a savings account earning minimal interest. It would have to last the rest of his life. He'd lost $75,000 in total, 50 to Pensri. Another 25 in flights, hotels, legal consultations, the costs of his disastrous adventure. It could have been worse. He'd read stories on the forums of men who'd lost everything, their entire life savings, their pensions. Some had even taken out loans. David had at least stopped the bleeding before it became fatal, but it didn't feel like a victory. He joined a local support group for fraud victims, sat in a circle once a week with other people who'd been scammed in various ways. Romance scams, investment scams, grandparent scams. Everyone had their story of trust betrayed and money lost. The counselor who ran the group talked about shame and recovery and moving forward. David listened but didn't share much. What was there to say? He'd been lonely and stupid and desperate. He'd ignored every warning sign. He'd chosen to believe because believing felt better than accepting that his life after Margaret was always going to be small and quiet and alone. Sometimes, late at night in his flat, David checked Pensri's Facebook. She'd unblocked him at some point, or maybe never blocked him at all. Her profile was still semi-public, still full of photos. New men appeared occasionally. Western men, always older. She was still in business, still finding lonely people and giving them hope and taking their money. David wondered how many there had been, how many there would be, how long she could keep doing it before age caught up with her too, and she became the one desperate and alone and willing to believe anything. He never reported her to the authorities. What would he say? That a woman had taken money he'd willingly sent? That she built a house with funds he'd transferred? That she'd made him promises he wanted to believe? None of it was technically illegal, just cruel, just business, as she'd said. He thought sometimes about writing to the men he saw in her new photos, warning them, telling them to run, but he never did. They wouldn't believe him anyway. Nobody believes they're the one being scammed. They always think they're the exception, the special one, the one who's found real love in an unlikely place. Just like David had thought. His sister called every Sunday, checked on him, invited him to visit. Sometimes he went, flew to Malaga for a week or two, sat on her terrace drinking wine and watching the Mediterranean. They didn't talk about Thailand much. Carol had been right, and they both knew it. There was no satisfaction in that for either of them. Just sadness. Just the recognition that loneliness makes people vulnerable, and vulnerability makes them foolish. David made peace with his new life eventually. Not happiness exactly, but acceptance. He had his flat, his pension, his routines. He was no more alone than he'd been in Croydon, really. Just older, wiser, more careful, more afraid. He didn't date, didn't trust, didn't imagine new beginnings anymore. He'd used up his chance at that and lost. On quiet evenings, he thought sometimes about the moment on the plane. That suspended space at 35,000 feet, when he'd discovered the truth, but still had time before landing. Before reality crashed in. There was a possibility in that moment, however brief, to turn back somehow. To demand the plane turn around. To refuse to participate in what came next. But you couldn't turn planes around mid-flight over personal crises. You couldn't undo choices once they'd been made. You could only ride them out to their inevitable conclusion and deal with the wreckage afterward. David understood now what he hadn't understood then. The trap hadn't closed when he boarded that flight to Bangkok. It had closed months earlier. The first time he'd sent money. The first time he'd ignored his sister's concern. The first time he'd chosen the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. By the time he discovered Pensri's Facebook photos at 35,000 feet, he was already caught, already lost, already too invested to walk away without losing everything. That's how these things worked. That's why they worked. You went in willingly, step by step, choice by choice, until turning back cost more than going forward. And then you were trapped. Somewhere in Thailand, in a house David had paid for but never seen, on land registered in a stranger's name, his dream existed without him. A concrete monument to hope and stupidity and the price of loneliness. Someone else probably lived there now. Pensri, maybe. Or another foreigner she'd convinced, or renters paying money into her account. It didn't matter. The house stood. The dream didn't. And David Mitchell, 60 years old, sat in a rented flat in Nottingham, eating dinner alone, watching television, waiting for nothing in particular, living the life he'd tried so desperately to escape. The cycle, as it always did, continued. Somewhere right now, another lonely person was scrolling through dating profiles. Another message was being sent. Another story was beginning. Another trap was being set. And the world kept turning, indifferent to it all.